you what I'm.
So I was just asking Artie, so you're holding on? Are you holding? And he said,
everything's going great. Everything's going great.
How are you, man?
Yes, sister's ass. That's how I'm doing.
Oh, man, this is ridiculous. Anatolian, the Fripp and Eno release an album? I have no idea. I know that Fripp...
2007 was the last Fripp and Eno release. Yep.
That's not recent?
Not unless you're an old person like myself.
Ooh, yes, of course.
So it's only 13 years ago. It's like, you know, hardly anything nowadays. God damn it.
Hey, Paul, hey, Carl. You know Carl Kretter is the guy from War Game Boot Camp, huh?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
All right.
Fine work they're doing over there.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay, so, hey, our subject today is... strategic war games. Is that right?
That is correct. Strategic level. Well, World War II, I think we said. I don't know. I thought we specified World War II. And there's definitely enough to talk about in strategic level World War II. I mean, you could have one show for an hour on strategic level World War II, and then have another show picking up exactly where you were left off and talk more about strategic level World War II. So because it's a huge space, right? Yes,
of course. How long do you think we're going to stay on topic?
It honestly, it depends on the chat. It is the chat. I blame all of you for derailing the conversation week after week.
I agree.
So, I am just answering the questions that are put to us.
So,
and I, of course, never ramble in any way.
No, and Stigler's on, so we have to be careful.
Right. Don't mention decision games.
So, and solo games. So, no, not solo games. 2-player games played solo. I correct myself, or I sit corrected. So obviously, Artie, you're going to talk about MMP when you talk about strategic war games. Is that right?
No.
What do you mean? No.
So of MMP's current lineup, I am aware of exactly one strategic game. Maybe I'm forgetting about something. That's plausible. Lincoln's War. That's the only one. Generally speaking, they don't really do strategic games. They do tactical and operational games. So everything else I could think of is...
What does SCS stand for?
Standard Combat Series.
Ah.
Because it's standardized, as it were.
I understand.
Which is actually interesting, because we could talk about that for an hour, probably. Well, it is less standardized than the Operational Combat Series, because there's like certain basic things that vary from game to game, like the stacking limit, for example, or the exact way artillery works, actually is part of the game-specific rules in SCS, where it's part of the series rules in OCS and BCS. So, in any case, when we say strategic, as Antoil is asking, I think we do have to be concerned. I think when... I'm going to have a couple of caveats here. For one thing, many strategic games, purportedly strategic games, actually have a lot of operational detail in them. And that is true of something like World in Flames. It's true of something like World at War. Where I think what I think makes it strategic is that you have economic control, which you typically don't in an operational game. And maybe political control too, or maybe not. It depends on the game. In a game like a lot of strategic level Civil War games, you might not have any political control.
You know, you're teaching me something here, because I thought strategic operational battalion, I thought it was just scale.
Well, a scale is the most obvious sign of what it is, but I mean, you can say battalion scale, or you could say strategic scale. There are two different indices of scale happening there. So it depends. It depends what you're talking about. When you say strategic, though, you're generally not particularly concerned with unit size. Unit size is often somewhat abstract. And sometimes there's a nominal size, like in WIF, for example, You have the nominal size where units are corps, or for Soviets, they're armies, but for everybody else, they're corps. Is that strictly adhered to? No, because you also have quote unquote divisions that are things like Gurkhas. But there was no Gurkha division, right? It was individual units of individuals. So they're really more special assets rather than divisions per se.
Look at that. I'm learning something today, man. So
yeah,
if I want to get into a strategic game, I got to get into economics and politics.
Well, you got to have some, those need to be, not necessarily politics. Like I said, it depends on the topic. But look, so in the sense of, there are World War II games, strategic level World War II games that completely script the politics. Axis and Allies is a strategic level World War II game where you have some control over the economy. You have no real control over the politics at all. So not necessarily politics, but either one of the two has to be in the game somehow, even if it's very abstract.
So then that new game by Bruno Sinigalio, Time for Trumpets, that is a grand strategic game? No.
That is an operational game.
An operational game. So monster game doesn't necessarily mean strategic game.
Okay, no, not at all. And in fact, there are plenty of examples of non-monster games that are nevertheless very strategic. You pulled one out last week, Struggle for Europe. That is a strategic level World War II in Europe game that simulates the economy by the deck. The deck is sort of the economic driver of that game, and you don't have a ton of control over it. But it's in the game, right? It's explicitly part of the model.
Now, is the politics and economics a ball and chain in a game like that, or is it actually fun and involving and engrossing?
It can be. It depends on the game. Again, I'm going to say that. So in like the politics in Struggle for Europe is non-existent. It doesn't even deal with that at all. But in Axis and Allies doesn't really deal with it at all. But many others do. So in World of Flames or World at War, or another example I could think of that's still around that's currently available is Unconditional Surrender, which is Sal Vasta's game of World War II in Europe, which is a very good game in a lot of ways. It has a very abstract treatment of the politics of the period where you're essentially drawing a political chit. I found it a very unsatisfying political model for the topic. And actually, I think it does that political model does the game a disservice. It has many other fantastic features, like the basic resolution of everything. It works really well in that game, and I found the politics unsatisfying. On the other hand, in something like, let's say you're playing World in Flames with the political economic pre-war add-on Days of Decision, then that's like a whole mini game of its own, and you might be very engaged by that. So it depends on the game. And in the World at War, you have a spreadsheet that tells you what the politics happens. So I'm of course making fun of it. There are actually political points that you allocate to various things, and then make rolls on tables that tell you what happens based on the result of the roll that was affected by the points that you allocated. So
do you get into strategic games with the politics and economics?
So it's funny because back in the day, and the day in this case, I mean like kind of the 90s, which was my like pre-modern wargaming heyday. We played almost exclusively tactical, and by tactical in this context, I mean ASL or strategic level stuff. We played almost no operational of any kind. So we played a lot of World of Flames. We played Advanced Third Reich was the Third Reich iteration around at the time. It wasn't yet a World at War. It was years away. We played War and Peace, which we tried to play as a strategic game. It worked poorly as a strategic game. As an operational game, it's a really good game. Resource management, Ken's right on this. Resource management is a better description. It's a more broad term.
Okay.
Those might be political points. I mean, in a sense, resource management is part of any war game, right? I mean, if I'm playing ASL, I've got squads. Those are resources, right? I decide, hey, I'm going to sacrifice this one squad to run out in the middle of the road to eat up all the defensive fire so that other squads can cross the road and attack those buildings across the street in Stalingrad, right?
Okay, so I'm thinking when it's politics and economics, I'm thinking like you're doing the Potsdam thing, and you're getting into all this politics stuff. And
it could be like that, but it can also be very transactional and accountanty. I mean, in the sense of something like World at War, or even Federation and Empire, which is not World War II, obviously, but it's a points-based, spend the points on things every turn or every quarter or whatever it is type of thing.
Okay.
WIF is like that too, except for WIF is simple enough that you don't necessarily need the spreadsheet. or the accountant pad. That's not quite true because you do have to keep track of what resources are controlled by whom. But and in many, Stegler points out that in some games like a World at War, it's political points too. You have economic points and political points and research points that you can then allocate among various things.
So this is all within the sequence of play, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So in World at War, you have like a yearly economic thing that you do where you spend a bunch of your points and then you can spend additional points throughout the course of the year. And the year is 4 turns. So
okay. Yeah.
Space Empires is a good example, actually. I would call it strategic level, and it is very much a resource management game.
Okay, so no big whoop. I'm not freaking out here.
I mean, the politics in Space Empires is kill everybody. So,
well, yeah.
Unless you're playing solitaire, in which case it's kill the cream horn of death.
The what?
The cream horn of death. Haven't you ever seen that old Star Trek episode where the evil planet-destroying cream horn is out to kill everybody?
I don't know.
Okay, well, everybody who's seen that episode knows what I'm talking about. The Doomsday Machine. And
it's called the Doomsday Machine. Yes,
it's called the Doomsday Machine. It looks looks like a pastry.
I see. Yes. Okay, so all right then. So I've done that stuff in Space Empire, and it doesn't bother me at all. I mean, I enjoy taking down the notes and what I need and how many factors this ship has and what I'm going to get.
So there are many players who object to paperwork during their gameplay, and I, that's fine. That's a reasonable position to take, I think. I, however, am a dork. So I love paperwork. I love adding sheets up and doing the bowling scores and all that stuff. So I am completely okay with a game that has paperwork, and Space Empires does have paperwork. If you've ever played, though, like the conceptual forebearer of Space Empires was a game called Stellar Conquest, which was originally a little metagaming mini game, but later came out in a big box version with a board and less fancy cards from Avalon Hill.
Didn't you send me that?
I definitely didn't send you that because I haven't had that in 30 years.
But
I love that game, but it was super accountanty. Space Empires is a very broadly similar game, but it has consciously pared back on the accounting aspects of it.
So it's way more than that?
Space Empires is substantially less than Stellar Conquest was.
Right, okay.
And I love Stellar Conquest. So this is topical, not strategic, however. Despite Campaign for North Africa, despite tracking individual jerry cans of gas, is not a strategic game. So it would be an exception to our rule that we've just established.
Do you have to really count the jerry cans?
I don't. I think it's points, but I mean, yeah, you're keeping track of supply points and fuel points and water points and stuff like that. So it's
individually.
Well, I don't know that they're like individual water by the cup, but I mean, yeah, you're keeping track of points for all those things.
Well,
that's part of why everybody said it was unplayable for 40 years.
Well, what I'm asking is that you have to take care of the gas by itself, the water by itself, the something else by itself, or is it all englobed into one?
I believe it's all three. I think you have to track each of those things individually. Don't quote me on Campaign for North Africa. We got experts on that kind of thing. Flat Top has a lot of bookkeeping. So, I mean, Flat Top it's not the same kind of bookkeeping, but yeah, there's a lot of bookkeeping.
Isn't that a solo game?
No. That you're thinking of either Carrier or Tokyo Express.
Thank you.
Or the other like Pacific thing that speaking of Pacific thing, not strategic, but Mark Herman's got 5 new videos out on his new edition of Pacific War. So go check those out. It's got the magical godlike finger of Mark Herman pointing at counters throughout the videos. It's fantastic. So Doug actually might be onto something here, because that lack of focus on the part of the design might in fact be the fundamental problem with Campaign for North Africa. That is a thing that I have noticed in some games, is they have a lack of focus on us. They don't say we're strategic or we're operational. They try to be both, and you end up with Grand Europa and your stuff never gets finished.
Is this a fight? Is this a fight?
I don't think Doug is completely... I wouldn't agree with Doug's statement literally, but I believe I see where Doug is coming from, and I think he's onto something, because it does have strategic aspects to it, and that's actually a problem because it is an operational game. So I guess the difference is, do you fundamentally start from the premise that it's just a strategic game, or are you starting from the premise that it's an operational game? I think Doug is starting from the premise that it's a strategic game because it includes those resource management elements, but then it does all this operational stuff and it bogs down. But on the other hand, you could say it's obviously an operational game based on the hex scale and the unit scale. But then you got all this accountant stuff to do as well, and that bogs it down. So I think it's just a different, it's the opposite of the way I was approaching the discussion about CNA, but I don't think he's wrong. So,
and Stigler, is he just busting here?
I don't want to use the word misshapen because it's actually a very attractive game by SPI standards. The pieces look nice, the maps look nice, component quality was for the era was very nice, but clearly, it is a game that has fundamental problems. I mean, whether you think it is worth dealing with those. I mean, every game has issues, right? But there are games with big issues and there are games with small issues. Sometimes you have a great game with big issues that is worth dealing with the issues to experience. And maybe for some people, Campaign from North Africa is that kind of thing. I don't believe it is for me, but I have alternatives that cover the topic. So I've got War in the Desert, which, you know, as bloated as that system is, it's not as bloated as Campaign for North Africa by a mile. And I've got DAC 2, so I could play out that part of the War in the Desert as well. So
Stigler's saying here, Quartermaster General, let's say, that would be a strategic game.
Well, I don't think he's referring to Quartermaster General specifically. But I've played Quartermaster General, by the way, and I like it a lot. It's like Risk for it's a more satisfying game of Risk, basically. But it's got its issues and challenges as well, in that it really does play best with 6 people or 5 people or whatever.
Right.
So there's that. But I mean, some people like that though. I like those paperwork type elements, to be honest about it. So I mean, that's just a play style preference, and I'm not gonna. Anyway, I'm not gonna work very hard to denigrate somebody else's play style. Let me put it that way. I'll just tell you that is my bag or that is not my bag or whatever. Somebody else. I mean, there's people that love. I don't want to say Combat Commander because that's at least a war game. There's people that love to play. I'm trying to think of an example of a game that I think is just a complete turd. Well, I'm some complete turd of a game, but there's people that love to like Pokemon, right? That's just not my thing, man. But I'm not going to criticize other people for enjoying playing Pokemon, right? So,
look at that. Yeah,
that's true. I mean, so that is one way that designers can approach these things, is to say you the player are in the shoes of this person in this position, whether that's a George Marshall or an FDR or a Field Marshal Tedder or whatever, and that person could be making decisions at a strategic level or an operational level or a tactical level or whatever. If you the player are George Marshall, then it is a strategic game. If you the player are Montgomery, then it is probably an operational game. And if you're Eisenhower, it's probably an operational game unless it's in the 50s.
So Artie, enlighten me. George Marshall, was he just administrative, this guy?
He was the chief of staff during World War II, or during, I believe, all of World War II.
Wow.
He was Eisenhower's superior.
That's a lot of stuff on his shoulders for this guy, man.
Oh yeah, no kidding. He was almost the guy, the commander in chief. Actually, FDR wouldn't give him up. He said, "No, I need you here. You can't go lead the actual army. We got to find somebody else." And they brought Eisenhower in from the Med. So,
man, we should talk about George Marshall one of these days, because I want to learn.
So at one point, now this could be apocryphal, so take it for what it's worth, but this is the story. At one point, the U.S. government the United States Army only had like generals. That was like the highest rank you could be, was general. And then they were in a position where, well, look, we got all these generals. We're going to put this guy in charge of a bunch of generals. He has to have like a higher title, right? So they considered instituting the rank of Field Marshal, which was a rank that was used in the British Army and the German Army and the Soviet Army and all these other armies at the time. And they said, well, the first person we got to give this rank to would be George Marshall, and then you would have Field Marshal Marshall, and that sounds undignified. So they did, 5-star general instead. That's the story. That's on the Wikipedia page. I'm not even making that up.
Are there any 5-star generals right now alive?
I don't think so. I think the last 5-star general was Omar Bradley, I think. Unless Westmoreland was a 5-star. I could be wrong. I don't think so. I could be wrong. Don't ask me about that.
MacArthur was 5 stars, right?
MacArthur was 5 stars too. A couple of people made 5 stars after the war. Bradley was one.
So I guess that's just a war thing.
Normally, only in wartime are 5-star generals or 5-star admirals appointed. For that matter.
Pershing, Kyle Reese says Pershing.
Pershing was before Eisenhower, though. So yeah, he's right, but. I think Pershing was promoted to that rank afterwards, though, I think. Don't quote me on that either. I'm not actually Wikipedia with
now. Is it true? And I'm going off topic here. That during World War II, during all the negotiations, Potsdam, Quebec, and all that, that they wanted to make Germany just a field of a
parking lot.
Well, no, to grow wheat or something like that. And Marshall said you can't do that type thing. I know I'm whatever.
I don't know that is an encapsulation of that discussion that really captures the essence of it. But yeah, that was a discussion that happened. And I mean, if you think about it, that is a discussion that was inevitable. How do we deal with Germany, given that we have said we're going to fight to the point of unconditional surrender, and Germany decided to fight to the point of most of the place was leveled. So
yeah,
one of the most of the cities. You go to Berlin, it's one of the newest cities in Europe because it was flattened in World War II. It's all post World War II construction, and the stuff there's stuff that they had to restore and other stuff that very little was untouched. Let me put it that way.
Do you know when the last brick was laid because of all the war destruction? What year?
Not offhand, no.
1989.
Not terribly shocked by that.
God, man. So, yeah. Anyways, going back to strategic war games. So,
yeah, actually, I think Doug mentions that Pershing was general of the armies, which I think was not a 5-star general per se, but it was the same type of thing where he was promoted to over general after World War I believe. So general of the armies, that means this guy was in command of everything. Of all the armies, yes. So who was the American armies? He wasn't in charge of the French army. And that was a political thing that had to be dealt with in World War I was how the French wanted the Americans to fight under their command, and the Americans wanted the British wanted the Americans to fight under their command. Hold on, and the Americans said absolutely not. We're going to give you these African American regiments, and they can fight under French command. We're fine with that. The French wanted the Americans to fight under the French command. Yeah. Are they crazy? Well, I mean, it doesn't make any sense. There's an argument to be made there. I mean, the French had been fighting at that point for 3 years. They've been occupied for 4 years. Yeah, well, yeah, they're fighting on their land, and it's their land too. That's probably worth something too. So, yeah, but when I say we, Americans are coming to save your ass. Well, yeah, I mean that was the American position, and the way it worked was there were some American units that did fight under French command. Those were the African American units. The rest of the American units fought under American command, subject to the dictates of the High Allied Command at the time. What were the French going to do? Put the Americans in the Maginot Line? The French would have taken... The French army was in absolute shambles in 1916. So, I mean, there was a literal possibility that the entire French army was going to get up and walk backwards and go home. So the French were not in a position to make demands of anybody. Doug, I want to answer your question. I'm as close to a Frenchman because I live in Quebec as you can get next to France. And let me tell you, yeah, they're crazy, but I love them, man. You want some heart? You want some heart? You want some grit? Huh? Whatever. So I saw a picture. I might find this picture and post it at some point on social media, apropos of nothing that has been mentioned thus far. I saw a picture of Napoleon's death mask. And you know what? I looked at that death mask and said, man, he had an immaculate complexion. I wonder what kind of skincare regimen he was using, because he looked great on his deathbed.
But, I mean, Reinhard Hard, whatever his name, Heydrich, also had a death mask.
Well, that's true, but that guy...
You know what I mean?
I'm disappointed that guy wasn't run over with a car, actually.
You're talking about Heydrich.
Heydrich, yeah. What a son of a bitch that guy was.
And, you know, I want to ask a question, and I'm going again off topic. Why is Napoleon so revered today? Wasn't he a tyrant?
Depends who you talk to. There's Napoleon in the annals of colonial misdeeds. Napoleon is not fondly remembered at all because of what went down in Haiti. So they had abolished slavery after the French Revolution, and Napoleon reinstituted it. I think in part, I mean, this is not an excuse, but in part due to just Napoleon's unwillingness to deal with it, because Napoleon had Napoleon stuff going on in Europe. But yeah, so Napoleon, that was not Napoleon's shining moment. Let's put it that way. There are actual Bonapartist groups in France today. There's a Bonapartist magazine, believe it or not. I forget what it's called, but there's a magazine dedicated to the political movement of Bonapartism, and there's a Bonapartist heir to the throne who's like a such and such descendant of Napoleon III and all that stuff. So yeah, it takes it pretty seriously. Napoleon was super important, I mean, and super influential in good ways too. I mean, so most Americans don't know, because our educational system is crap.
Yeah.
Most American law is based, whether it's federal law or state law or local law or whatever, is ultimately, it's based on precedent that's ultimately a descendant of English common law.
Oh.
Except in Louisiana, where the law is descended from the Napoleonic Code.
Well, our Quebec civil code is Napoleonic.
Yeah, so it probably is, and a lot of European countries are still have legal systems based on the Napoleonic Code.
Yeah.
So and that is a thing that Napoleon did that turned out to be beneficial. So it like many, but not all historical topics, some. The number of historical topics that are like legitimately black and white questions is really pretty small. But there are some examples. Nobody credible is defending Hitler, for example.
Yeah, and I don't think it's going to happen. It's not the same.
In most cases, it's complicated, right? And it is a disservice to history and to the discussion of history to ignore the complexities of the historical situation. I mean, if I could sum up the information, not the facts, but like the understanding that I got out of taking however many history classes it was in the pursuit of a history degree, and I sum it up in like 3 words: history is complicated.
Oh, yeah.
It's always complicated. It's always more complicated than you can sum up in a sentence. The history of anything is complicated.
And you don't get the whole story anyways. When it comes to history.
Okay, so I'm looking. I'll digress here again. So I am not often bitten by an actual game design bug in terms of war games. Okay, I'm actually working on something right now. It's an interwar game between this period between World War I and World War II.
Okay,
it's if you want to cover that whole period, it's actually really hard to research, because almost all of the post German government change in 1933 or whatever it was is all, this happened because Hitler was bad. And while that's true, that doesn't examine the underlying geopolitical causes that led the German government down the path of claiming this particular territory and that particular territory and trying to do this, because there are geopolitical reasons why those things happen.
Yes.
Soviet history is also susceptible to this. You hear a lot of this happened because Stalin was bad. Yes, Stalin was bad, but there's also a historically Russian imperative to have buffer countries between Russia and the rest of Europe that kept invading Russia. So that's really what was after. Hey, we want the eastern side of Poland and we want the Baltic countries. And that's why now they're making claims on Ukraine, because Belarus is essentially a Russian puppet state. And Russia wants the buffer state because it doesn't trust the West to not invade them, because the West has invaded them repeatedly. So these things are there's always more reasons behind these questions than this one person made this decision because they were an evil person, or even because they were a good person. That is unhelpful reductionism. So
you know what? Talking about Napoleon and strategic war games, now, is there a strategic Napoleonic game?
Okay, so the one I can think of off the top of my head is so in the sense of including explicit mechanisms for the politics and economics, Empires in Arms springs to mind. In a much simpler vein, I would point to Age of Napoleon by Renaud Verloc, French designer. It's a card-driven area movement game. That's a pretty simple game. Can play it in a sitting. I'd call that strategic level as well. So and that's another one where the economics are kind of built into the deck.
Okay, so what about politics in a game like that?
There's really no politics in that game. That's a two-player game. It's France against everybody else.
So basically, it's logistics. You're thinking of food. You're thinking of water, like you said, water, whatever.
Yeah. So I'm trying to catch up with the chat here. But apparently, we got back.
They're going crazy. Everybody's hating on everybody.
So.
See, you see.
So yeah, Doug says Robert E. Lee is on my short list of most overrated generals in history, as is Hannibal. I agree with Doug on both points here. Actually, I think Lee was definitely a very good general in a lot of respects, but in other respects, he was not very good and overreached at least twice. And got caught with his pants down and had to retreat with his tail between his legs. Hannibal, on the other hand, when it came to the decisive battle, lost. So I think Scipio is, in contrast, is underrated and Hannibal's a bit overrated. Hannibal makes a better story though, because with the elephants crossing the Alps, and he's kind of this little scrappy little guy against this big, this massive power, ignoring the fact that the Carthage was just as big a power as Rome for part of that period.
Now, hold on a second. Robert E. Lee, how can he be an under or whatever overestimated general? Because he almost took it. Well,
how close were they to taking it? I guess that's my question. So if you talk about Lee was certainly had his good days and bad days.
Well, he lost the war at Gettysburg, right? It's over.
Well, I think so. I think that entire summer of 1863 is decisive rather than Gettysburg specifically. So don't forget that Vicksburg falls. So Gettysburg's over on July 3rd, although there's still some skirmishing on the 4th as the Confederate Army retreats. But the Union Army is badly mauled. They're really not in any shape to run down and destroy the fleeing Confederates at that point. But, you had this big victory on the field. The Union held the field at the end of the day. It looks like a Union victory, much like Antietam. Union got, the only reason why it went down as a Union victory is that it is the Confederates that retreated. The very following day, on July 4th, 1863, Vicksburg falls to Grant. And that cuts the Confederacy in half. It severs Texas from the rest of and Louisiana from the rest of the Confederacy. That's a problem for the South, right? So, and it's although they still win at the tactical level here and there after that, it was kind of over at that point, unless the Union had managed to have their will to continue fighting collapse, which is the victory condition for a number of strategic level Civil War games, actually, is that there's some kind of national will behind the Union, and if it goes below a certain level, the Union loses because they decide they're just going to sign a paper that it says it's over.
A strategic Civil War game that involves politics. Is there such a game?
Well, you don't necessarily. So I'll point to For the People. Okay, so yeah, there's politics in that game. But they're in the events, right? It's a card-driven game, and some of the cards have events, and the politics are modeled by, you don't have to necessarily, when we say it's in the game, we don't necessarily mean, well, you got this pool of points that you have to spend and do stuff with. It doesn't have to be explicit like that. It can just be built into the model. So the for the people, for example, there are cards with events that get played that represent the political things that happen during the course of the war. So yeah, it's in the game, it's in the model. So in that sense, it is a strategic game, but it's also a game that has some operational elements too, in that you're moving individual armies around. So it's a successful example of a game that kind of bridges the gap between strategic and operational in a successful way, unlike, say, Campaign for North Africa, which I think does not successfully bridge the gap between strategic and operational.
Now, I don't know if I'm going to ask a stupid question here, Artie, but are coin games strategic games?
Yes, absolutely. And I say that because the politics is built into the model. You don't necessarily have a track for the politics, although in some cases you do have tracks that basically that's what it represents. But the politics are baked into the victory conditions. So in something like a distant plain, for example, one of the coalition victory conditions is get the troops out, right? That's a political objective.
Right.
That's not a military objective.
That's right.
You want to be able to say, we are leaving, we have to have the country in such and such a good enough shape, and then pull all the troops out, and then we win, right? Where the coalition allied local Afghani government wants the country to be in good shape. That's great, but they also want to build this patronage with like local forces and issue bribes and do things the way things have always been done there. So that their victory conditions are different than their coalition partners, and that's part of the model. It causes friction between. Now they may get along in some games and not in others or whatever, but that's part of the fun, right? That causes friction. It positions those two allies to be at loggerheads when decision making time comes. Then the other two factions are kind of not explicitly allied, but they often find themselves in bed together because the other two are definitely opposed to things that they have going on, like growing heroin, for example. That's what the warlords want to do. They want to grow heroin and have a good time. So, because who doesn't love a good heroin? So, I believe that we are. So I'm not going to give the chat the. I will say that the Anaconda plan, it is one of the big factors that won the Civil War the way it was won. I don't want to get into the specific political discussion of what caused the Civil War. People can do their own homework on that. The facts are out there. Yeah. We are just not going to solve, and I don't want to be dismissive of the questions. We are just not going to solve that for anybody in the context of the remaining 23 minutes that we have here tonight.
So Artie, that game by Clash of Arms, you play a solo guy, and you're
Legion of Honor.
Yeah, would you consider that strategic?
Definitely not. To be honest, I'd consider it a role-playing game.
Okay.
No, it's weirdly mechanistic and not open-ended as role-playing games go, but you can also play it by yourself, which you can't with most RPGs. So that's where I think that fits. I think it fits in a completely different category to which none of this terminology is even relevant.
Okay, I'll listen to you, Artie.
I am an expert on RPGs as well, as you know.
Yes, sir.
So I don't talk about it that much because that's not the channel I have. But
you know what's a good solo strategic war game?
Do you have a particular topic? Because I can think of examples.
No, Napoleonicon.
The Napoleonic Wars from, I think, White Dog Games is a good one. You can also, there's at least 3 White Dog Games, strategic level, solitaire, civil. I'm talking dedicated solitaire.
Yes.
Civil War games. And what are the 6 games that are going to work with the GMT solo method kit? I know Paths of Glory is one, and Commands and Killers Ancients is one.
We the People.
Is that is in fact my question. I want to know,
because I have the picture in my head.
For the People.
That's what I meant.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll be honest. That's a fantastic game.
Is it really?
It's a fantastic game. Yeah. So I was like, U.S. Civil War. Who cares? I'm not into that. I mean, I had owned a few Civil War games here and there. Had never played or punched or any of that. Had never played any of this till about 5 or 6 years ago. The game that caused me to become a giant Civil War nerd was For the People. That is the one reason. Now, I didn't see a fascinating documentary or anything like. It wasn't Ken Burns, which I had watched the Ken Burns Civil War. It was For the People. So it is all Mark Herman's fault.
Really?
The giant ass library of Civil War books and games that I have now is literally all Mark Herman's fault.
That guy's incredible. That guy. No, what's going through his head?
He's killing me here.
What's not going through his head? That's what I want to know.
Yeah. So the 6 games for reference are Paths of Glory, which the STUKAJOE solo method was originally developed for. Paths of Glory and Illusions of Glory, Washington's War, and For the People, both of which are by Mark Herman. Caesar, Rome versus Gaul, which is one of the new Mark Simonich games, and Commands and Colors Ancients. Be very curious to see the solo method for Commands and Colors Ancients too, actually.
Now, oh my God, I had a question. What do you think about Paths of Glory? That's a strategic war game?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It's got, in the same sense of For the People, it's got operational aspects to it too, but the operational aspects do not overload the strategic aspects of it. Paths of Glory is a Ted Racer game. It's a fantastic game. It's one of my, if I had to say these are my top 10 war games of all time, I'd put Paths of Glory. And it's not really in my space in the sense of being this giant ass X and counter operational thing. It's handily one of my favorite games.
Now, can that system be done for the Civil War?
It's not that dissimilar from For the People. It's different, but it's the Mark Herman card-driven game method where there are cards and the cards have points, and you can either play the card for the points or play it for the event. It's that idea.
Paths of Glory is the same thing, right?
Yes. That's the Mark Herman, the thing that Mark Herman came up with to give us what we now call card-driven games, knowing that there's a lot of games that had cards in it before that. Ken Kloby mentions Compass redoing Victory Games' Civil War. Yeah, they're supposed to. I haven't really heard anything about that. They may be waiting on Eric Lee Smith for that. He's got a bunch of irons in the fire. I know that. Oh, I dissed Eric Lee Smith very badly. I credited a rule to Richard Berg, and it was actually Eric Lee Smith, and I looked like a total knob on Facebook somewhere. A couple of, oh, sorry, Eric, oh, my bad. Felt like a knucklehead.
Well, it's a mistake, man.
It was the kind of rule, like this funny rule that was in the game, that is the kind of thing that Richard Berg would have done, but it was Eric Lee Smith instead.
Man. Yeah, so Carl. Okay, Carl speaks.
Holden Messerschmitt, Redbreast. I think, anyway. Different people tell you different things.
What's Redbreast?
They're 2 types of whiskey, Redbreast and Green Spot.
Oh yeah, the Green Spot it's Irish.
Yeah, they're both Irish. Redbreast is Irish too. I actually haven't had Green Spot. I've only had Redbreast. So.
Yeah. I was going to say something, but
that is the P. Ridge grandfather rule. Yes, that is in fact the rule that was being referred to, and I didn't realize that was Eric Lee Smith. I thought that was a Richard Berg game.
So what's the grandfather rule?
That rule that said so and so's the designer's grandfather fought in this unit, so if the unit gets wiped out, you have to throw the game away because the game never got written because the designer's grandfather died during the battle, and it's in one of the SPI Civil War quads. I thought it was in the P. Ridge Great Battles of the American Civil War, which I believe was a Richard Berg design, but it was in one of the blue and gray quads.
So what happens when you use that rule? What, the game never existed?
It's a joke rule, right? I think it's marked as an optional rule, actually. But Richard Berg slipped this kind of stuff into his games all the time.
Yeah, he did the Italians with the pasta water there.
Well, there's that too, and yeah, he clearly is pulling our leg with that, right? And that's an optional rule too for the record. It's not like part of the baked into the rules or anything.
I can't believe it, man.
So, oops.
Illusions of Glory. Have you played it?
I have only played Paths of Glory of the 3. I haven't played Illusions or Pursuit.
So
Illusions is the East Front Pursuit is the Near East.
Okay.
I've had a lot of people say that they really like Pursuit of Glory, by the way. I've heard that from a lot of people. There's people that prefer it to Paths of Glory.
Okay, so Paths of Glory is grand strategic, right? World War I?
I'd say strategic. I wouldn't say grand strategic necessarily because of those operational aspects, because in the fact that you do have like chits that represent armies, or they are, I believe, armies in this particular case.
So what's the difference between grand strategic and strategic then?
I would make the case that grand strategic includes no operational elements. And if we're going to say that, then that narrows the games a lot. I think Quartermaster General is a grand strategic game.
I see.
It has basically no operational elements whatsoever.
Okay.
Because of the scale, right? The scale is you have a piece in this space.
That's right.
Diplomacy is the same type of thing. There is no operational element to diplomacy whatsoever.
I'm learning a lot tonight. I'm learning a lot. You know what I'm saying?
And also the rules for handling things like politics can be completely abstract too, like they are in diplomacy. Diplomacy doesn't have rules for politics. It says go negotiate. That's it. That's the whole system. I could put the entire like mechanics of diplomacy on an index card. Because the whole game it's not really about that. It's about negotiation. So, but it's strategic in that sense.
Who designed Pursuit?
I don't think it was Ted. I forget who did it actually.
I'm doing okay, Kenneth.
Illusions of Glory was definitely not Ted. Illusions of Glory was Perry R. Silverman.
So if I know how to play Paths of Glory, I know how to play Illusions.
Pretty much, yeah. There's some differences, but there's not really that many differences. So there is a reprint of Pursuit of Glory on P500 right now. I should probably order that. And it is a design by Brad Stock. Brad Stock and Brian Stock. But all three of them use the same basic system. For that matter, the game Triumph of Chaos from Clash of Arms about the Russian Civil War also uses the Paths of Glory system.
Okay.
What about that, more errata.
What about that new game? And I'm looking at it right now from CTS or something like that, but Stalingrad Solitaire by Gary Graber.
I have not looked closely enough at that to have an opinion on it. But if it's just Stalingrad, then that tells me it's a. So I mean, you don't know from that title, right?
Well, it's point to point. It's point to point. Does that tell you anything?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. So you can have point to point strategic. You can have point to point tactical. Pavlov's House is a point to point game. It's tactical. So it's a building in Stalingrad. And the other thing is with Stalingrad, you look at the Avalon Hill Stalingrad, it's not just Stalingrad, it's like the whole East Front. So, I mean, I got to know more than Stalingrad to give you some info on it, and I just don't know anything about that particular game. Now, Doug mentions the infamous please douse the map in lighter fluid and set it alight rule. What? I don't remember that being in NATO. I thought that was in a different game, but I might be misremembering that, or I might be misremembering it or conflating with some other humorous rule that SPI had, because they did slip that kind of stuff into games from time to time. So, but yeah, there was a rule that said if there's a nuclear exchange, douse the map in lighter fluid and set it on fire. That was in the rules.
That's
so.
I should read more rule books. I'm sure I'd get a laugh. It's very Monty Python-ish.
That's a thing. That's a bit out of vogue now, actually.
Is it?
To put little jokey things like that in the rule book. And not that I never see it, but Jerry White does it. But mostly people stay away from that now. It's all very formal now.
Well, I have spoken to Sal Vasta a while ago, and what I know is that he entered the name of his town in Italy, something that has nothing to do with the game at all. And he just said, hey, I'm the designer. That's my town.
Yeah. See, I don't think cities do anything in that game.
You know,
so I'm not sure it matters. Great game, though, by the way. I assume we're talking about Unconditional Surrender.
Yes.
Sal's one of the co-designers of Axis Empire's Totaler Krieg as well, from Decision, which is also quite a good game. It's him, Alan Emmerich, and a third person.
How far does Sal Vasta go, man?
What do you mean?
In games, in history.
I think the only two of his I've played have been Unconditional Surrender and Axis Empire's Total Krieg and Daisenso. But
you enjoyed
yeah. I think so on the Axis Empires game. So there was a game a long time ago. I don't know who the designer was of the original Krieg that was redone as a second edition called Total Krieg, and then it was redone as a third edition called Axis Empires Total Krieg, and then they released a companion game called Axis Empires Daisenso, which is the Pacific Theater. Okay, so Total Krieg, Axis Empires Total Krieg are all just Europe. I think the system works as I've never played the first two editions. I've only played the latest one. I think it works really well for Europe. I think the level of abstraction assigned to the air and naval lend the Pacific Theater an unsatisfying feel if you are playing with just the Pacific game. If you're playing it with Europe, it's better. In addition, it is a three-sided game. It is a Western Allies, Axis, and Soviets. And if you are playing the Soviets, and I mean, you could just two-hand it. I guess that wouldn't be a big problem. But if you're playing the Soviets as a separate Soviet player in Daisenso, you got nothing to do. You'll just sit there and you occasionally play cards that do nothing. So unless the Japanese decide to invade the Soviet Union, which, that happened historically, and they got spanked, and they rethought their attack plan against the Soviet Union after that.
Hey, Artie, why don't we hear more about unconditional surrender? How come I don't hear much about it?
I think it's been through 2 printings already, so it was very well regarded. There's a lot of YouTube video on it.
There's an expansion.
There's Well, so there's Unconditional Surrender Case Blue, which is a standalone mini game that appeared in C3I magazine. And then there's the Unconditional Surrender World War I that is either on P500 or going to be soon on P500. I believe Sal, I believe Sal is working on a Pacific Theater one too. But I think for the same reasons that Daisenso is unsatisfying, I think Sal's going to run up into the same problem. I think his naval and air rules in Unconditional Surrender work really well in Europe because it is primarily a land war. The Pacific Theater is primarily a naval war, and super abstract naval rules leave you without much to do or without interesting things to do. So I think it's a design challenge. I don't think it's an unsurpassable design challenge, but I don't doubt that he is struggling with it.
You just brought something to my mind. Sal, you said Sal's naval rules are amazing. That means that something else that Sal did is not as amazing as his naval rules. So, is there a rule book where is there a designer where some guy gets it all right?
Probably not at the designer level, but maybe at the game level. I was trying to think of an example in the wargaming space. And I mean, a lot of it depends on what you, the individual, or me, the individual, or Ken Kloby, the individual, are looking for in a war game. What I see as perfect, somebody else might see as tedious. So then that's a factor that one has to consider. I'll be honest, Battle Line is a game that I think has no serious flaws. Is that something I want to play all the time? Absolutely not.
You're talking about Reiner Knizia's game.
Yeah, Reiner Knizia's cute little card game, Battle Line. It's pretty much a flawless game. There's no problems in that game. Doesn't mean it's interesting to me. I'll play it occasionally, but I have a copy of it. I like it. I give copies away as gifts to marginally favored relatives. So
that's interesting. That's interesting.
Everybody's getting a ham for Christmas this year. He thinks I'm kidding. My wife thinks I'm kidding too. Sons of bitches are all getting a cottage ham for Christmas.
Yeah, man. Anyway. I swear to God.
Yeah, and that's true. Board Game Arena is a thing that I think Unconditional Surrender and a very small number of other war games are available in. So if that is your bag, go right ahead. I think you get better mileage out of Vassal, but it's a free country. So,
man, there's so many questions I have, man. Unbelievable. Now, Artie, other than the White Dog games that you said N by Napoleon, is that right?
N, the Napoleonic Wars, yeah.
Okay, so that is a strategic game that has politics.
Very strategic. Yeah.
Has politics in it.
It's built in.
Built
into the model. It's super abstract. I mean, it's like a square map with a bunch of squares on it that represent like notional spaces of things you can do. But it's strategic, very grand strategic at that. And it's Napoleonic, which puts it in a little more unusual place. So it'd be interesting to contrast things like strategic. I know of no comparably abstract grand strategic World War II game, right? The closest thing I could think of is Struggle for Europe. But that's not nearly as abstract as in the Napoleonic Wars. That is I think there's probably something going on, like some designers feel more free to think outside the box when it comes to spaces in the wargaming field that are maybe not as thoroughly handled as World War II. Yeah, STUKAJOE does have a demo video of N.
Well,
that's why I bought it. That's STUKAJOE is another person that's cost me a ton of money.
God,
thanks,
man.
Joe. I bought Napoleon versus Europe on the strength of Joe's fascinating playthrough videos on that too. So years to run that down.
What's Board Game Arena?
It's an online web-based site that lets you play a small number of games and an even smaller number of war games interactively in your browser. It's nice because you're doing it in the browser and you don't have to download anything. War Planner for World at War does the same thing and is strategic level too.
Well, I'm gonna check it out because I gotta start playing games, man. I swear to God.
Well, we might have good news for you on that field in the future. Ken Clovey mentions that Cataclysm seems pretty abstract. I'd agree with that. I found Cataclysm sufficiently abstract that I found it hard to grasp. I actually have played it for a few hours. Actually played it with Grant and Alexander from the Players Aid. You know, those guys.
Not to be mentioned.
But they enjoyed it, but they had already played it, and I had not already played it, and I had I was thrilled to be playing with them, don't get me wrong, and that was fun. I did not feel the urge to run out and buy the game at GMT's booth immediately afterwards. So I will try it again at some point, probably. So another thing with strategic level games is the degree to which the game can go completely off the historical rails. So, for example, A World at War is, especially for a game as complicated as it is, with as many moving pieces as it has, tends to kind of stick to the historical process in a lot of ways, because if you take it too far off the rails, you'll get rolled. World in Flames, on the other hand, is much more sandboxy, and you can do a lot of ahistorical things in it. Cataclysm is more like World in Flames than it is like A World at War. It is a game that lets you, it is very much a sandbox that lets you kind of make huge history-changing decisions that result in a completely different outcome than was seen historically, like radically different outcome. Triumph of Tragedy is the same way.
Hold on, Artie. You said,
and that's a good game too, by the way.
You said that it's some of these games are going to play ahistorically, but doesn't it start off with a historical basis?
Yeah.
So aren't all
the mechanics are going to guide the process of developing history within the context of the game.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And A World at War does this because there's a rule for everything. There's a separate chapter for every little historical situation.
Okay.
Stalingrad, chapter. Pearl Harbor, chapter.
Okay.
So when that happens, and you always open the Pacific War with Pearl Harbor, so you got to read the 10 pages on Pearl Harbor, and execute that process again. It's the same type of thing.
Okay.
So whereas a game like WIF, which is much less prescriptive in that respect, kind of gives you these mechanisms and then turns you loose on them.
Right.
You can do stuff like not invade the Soviet Union.
Right.
That's a decision you can make in a World War II, but it's a decision you have to plan from the very beginning. You kind of do in WIF as well, I suppose. You could try to do things like manipulate U.S. entry in WIF that you really don't have the opportunity to do too much in A World at War.
But
especially if you're playing.
Isn't that interesting?
I think so, but you know, I can respect the position that says that you want a vaguely historically plausible outcome, right? That's kind of one of the areas in which I think unconditional surrender breaks a bit, because its politics system can result in a war in which Germany or Italy joins the Allies against Germany. Now, I think that's historically more plausible than people think, but it blows the game up.
Really?
So, yeah. It was not by any means inevitable that the Germans and the Italians had historically conflicting policy goals over the Tyrol and those kind of regions and stuff like that. But Hitler and Mussolini personally hit it off, so they had an alliance. That was most of the reason why it actually went down the way it did. There was, I think, a non-zero chance that the Italians would have either stayed out of it or more likely joined the Allies if they thought that was the better bet. But they thought Germany was the better bet at one point, so that's where they ended. Franco, on the other hand, bet correctly and stayed out of it.
Yeah, I'm wondering why he stayed out of it. But that's another subject for another time.
Spain was wrecked after a very bloody civil war that had just ended before the actual big war broke out.
Yeah, but he won. Franco won.
Well, yeah, but it was very bloody. I mean, and there was a lot of problems in Spain at the time. Franco had a lot to deal with. He probably aided the Axis as much as he realistically could have without embroiling Spain in the war on the Axis side.
Well, didn't Germany shellac the other side of Spain, the civil war in Spain? Franco had the Germans practice their blitzkrieg, or whatever they want to call it, in Spain.
The French and the Soviets had contributed to the Republicans too. Some I didn't kind of put the time researching the thing I'm working on. Actually, so my notional period is 1920 to 1939, right? So to 1920 to whenever the war breaks out. 1920, Spain was still royalist Spain. I didn't know that. I thought the Second Spanish Republic was founded earlier. So I didn't know that. So if I started in 1920, I gotta have royalist Spain, and then I gotta have some event that turns it into Republican Spain, and then later on, at least have a chance of having a civil war there. So history's complicated, man.
I hate to cut you off, but we're a minute over time.
We're over. Oh my God, we're running late.
You know, God, I got so many questions already. I swear to God, man.
I am always delighted to answer any lingering questions next week.
No, but you bring questions. As soon as you talk, you bring something out. You bring something out. I mean,
well, at least you're listening, unlike the people I had to work with today. So,
okay. So, Artie, thanks. Hey, people, thank you very much. Stigler, I don't know what to say. Next week.
He's right.
Next week. Yeah.
What are we doing next week? What's our topic for next week?
You know what?
Your sister's ass. So, anyway, we'll come up with a topic.
Yeah, we'll come up with something, Artie.
Please do tune in next week.
Okay. Hey, so thank you very much, people. And we're going out. Peace.